Guys, take a look at that gorgeous meat, that beautiful red rind. I'm going to teach you today how to make real Texas barbecue. This is Mesquite Smoked Texas Barbecue Brisket. It's as good as it gets, guys. Get ready. Here it comes. Well, howdy, folks. Welcome to Texas Cooking Today. I'm Stuart Trotter, your host. Today we're going to be preparing some wonderful, delicious food. And what you're watching here, this is one of my tutorials. So if you're looking for all of the answers and all of the details about this recipe, you found the right video. If you just need the recipe, watch the previous episode. That's what that is. And thank you very much for watching. Now, let's get into this. Well, hey folks, that is beautiful, isn't it? That's barbecue brisket. This is a Texas treat, okay? This is real Texas barbecue. What we're going to be doing today is going over, number one, how to properly trim that big slab of meat, that big brisket. Also, we're going to go over a nice rub for you to use on your barbecue. You're going to be impressed with the taste of this rub and with how simple it is to use. Also, we're going to get into the ins and outs of how to do a brisket the right way when it comes to smoking it. There are rights and wrongs to this, guys, so I'm going to show you all of it. Today we're going to be making real Texas barbecue, and this is a Mesquite Smoked Brisket. Let's get out there and get this thing cooked up. Come on, let's go. All right, guys, here it is, all of our goodies for Texas barbecue. Let's talk about what this is all about. It's about this guy right here. We buy these massive slabs of meat. It's called a brisket. Now, so you'll know, if you're looking at a cow, you look at him from the front, you go down that neck, and right there where the front legs part, you see two lobes hanging down. Those two lobes are this point right here. So if his leg was here, this is one of those lobes hanging down, all right? And there's, of course, another one for the other side. But this is basically, if you think about it the right way, this is the pectoral muscle, okay? This muscle right here. And there's two muscles here. There's one which moves the leg forward and backward, and that's the primary larger muscle, what they call the flat. And then there's the head meat, which is the muscle that kind of moves the leg in and out this way. And that's what your brisket is. Now guys, there's 3 grades when it comes to grading beef, if you don't already know this. If you look at a brisket that's packed up just like this in its original packer's wrapper, what they call a cryo pack. This is from Swift. It is a packing plant. There's other ones like IBP, you know, there's a lot of different packers. But the thing of it is what you need to look for is this label right here. This one says USDA choice. You can get select, you can get choice, and you can get prime beef, guys. But what you need to remember is when you go up in those cost levels, there's more fat. And I'm not talking about this big slab of fat you see across the back here. We're talking about the intermuscular fat, the fat that runs in between these layers of meat, okay? That's the fat that helps cause the brisket to become very tender and very delicate. All right, so we have a good cut here. Choice is a great way to go for Texas barbecue, and I recommend that. The select, you may save a few dollars, but in the end, you're going to have a tougher barbecue. It's going to take a little longer to cook it, okay? Prime, you're probably going to be priced out of it, okay? It's generally sold just to the restaurants. So guys, we have our beautiful slab. Over here we have our spices. I've got some paprika, cayenne, cumin, onion powder, garlic powder, and salt. And we're going to be using those wonderful spices to make the most fantastic rub. All right, don't worry. Towards the end of the video, you're going to find your recipes on proportion on all of this. Back here I've got lots of wood. This is mesquite wood, guys. Mesquite grows all over Texas. It's an absolutely beautiful wood, okay? It makes beautiful cabinetry, but it also makes delicious barbecue. Now the thing about mesquite, and what makes it a little different from hickory or pecan or oak or apple wood. What's different about mesquite is it's a very oily wood, okay? Lot of tannins in it, okay? And a lot of people say, well, you can't smoke a brisket with mesquite because the mesquite's got too much oil in it and the brisket will come out bitter. Well, guys, believe it or not, you can do real Texas barbecue with mesquite, and you can do it on a brisket, and I'm going to teach you the right way today. Yes, it has a lot more tannins in it, and yes, if there's too much smoke or too long of a smoke, it'll come out bitter. I'm going to teach you how to make it come out right so it tastes like the right kind of barbecue. Also, we're going to be using that rub on it after we trim it up. So I'm going to teach you how to trim a brisket the way a professional would trim it before smoking. And some people will say, oh, we don't trim those briskets. Well, if you don't, you're kind of lazy. And I'm going to teach you why. There's a lot of fat on a brisket, and only so much fat can render through the meat, guys. And any extra fat is simply in the way of allowing smoke penetration in that meat. So we're going to take out those heavier formations of fat. We're going to leave a thin layer of fat all over it, and it's going to come out tasting even better because of that, because I'm going to get more smoke penetration in the meat itself. All right, so this is Texas barbecue, and we get into the whole ball of wax on this one, guys. So come on over, let's get started trimming this thing up. Okay guys, it's time for us to trim up our brisket, and there's basically going to be 3 serious deposits of fat that you deal with on your brisket. Now of course there's not much on top here, but on certain types of beef, like let's say Black Angus, you're going to see on this side of the meat a big clump of fat right here, and it's kind of an extension of what you're seeing right here, this little bitty one that runs right here. All right, and what that is that's simply the fat that runs in between this cut of meat and this cut of meat. Believe it or not, there's 2 muscles here, guys, and so these 2 muscles control different movements. This one up here, the flat, actually controls the cow's leg moving forward and backward, and this one down here actually controls the cow's leg in and out from side to side. So it's a little bit smaller because they do less work with that muscle. Anyway, the grains run separate on those too, and it gets into slicing later. But what I want to tell you about this is we got to remove, if you've got that big band of fat here, trim it down so it's only 1/4 of an inch. We'll take off a little bit of that, but not much. The next one is right here. In between this muscle and this one, you have this huge slice of fat that runs right up under there, and it comes out right on this other side where you saw this, okay? The grain on this runs perpendicular to the grain on this. So the grain here is running this way, and the grain on this muscle is actually running this way. All right, so later when we go to slicing this, once I've cut so far into the flat, right about to here, I then stop and I separate those 2 pieces of meat and slice them separate one from the other so that I can cut across the grain on this one. Otherwise you'll have long pieces of meat grain on some of your slices if you don't do that. Now let's get busy taking out that fat, and then the fat that's on the back here. On this side over here, you're going to run into a real hard, knobby feeling fat, and that can be trimmed down a little bit. You don't need your fat to be too thick. Guys, there's only so much fat that can render down through this meat, okay? Now, I cut a little of my meat here, and it's not going to matter. I'm just taking that little nubbin off. Right here, I'm going to thin this just slightly. There we go. Not much. I want to keep the majority of my fat. Now back here, where I have this big one, and this is very dense fat. If you like rendering your own fat down, you know, to use it later on, you know, like having tallow around the house, the way some people keep bacon fat or whatever, you just have to cook this stuff gently and slowly, and then the liquid that you get from it, you let that recongeal, and that is your tallow right there. You see, this is extremely thick, and that's not going to do us any good to have that much fat in any location. All right, so basically what that fat's doing, it is so thick that it prevents our smoke from getting full penetration, okay? And you've seen how much I've taken off of that. So you're getting some idea of how really, whoops, went into my meat. There we go. Not a problem. There we are. So thin that up. This over here doesn't really need much of anything. Unless you notice it's intensely thick, you can take out some of it. But I try not to get too wild through this center fat. Now, we'll move on to that next section of fat. I mentioned to you before that sometimes certain breeds will have a big slab right here. And that's this part. It's the continuation of what goes in between the two. But if you do have too much there, just go ahead and remove that. And then the last spot is that huge honking piece right here. Now, so what I want to do here is I'm going to make a cut with my knife right up in there. Now, let's open this up and look. Look how deep it is before we get to meat. I'm sorry, folks, but this is nothing but a huge wedge of fat right here, and it's not going to do anything good for you, all right? Some of the fat can render through meat, but when you get too much fat, there's no way it can all render through there. Look at that. As I said, one massive wedge of fat. Now I've opened this up. There's less fat up in here. I'm going to trim it just slightly more. But now that fat is thin enough in this spot that I can get smoke directly into my meat right there. And there's still enough fat to render through everything else. Now, this is a beautiful thing because I've given it just enough of a view. I'm going to show you our difference in the grain of that meat that I was talking about earlier. There we go. I'm trying to get that more exposed. There we are. So, if we look closely at our meat grain on this, we can see we have a different muscle right down here than we do up here, and we have a difference in the way grain runs between the two. All right, so beautiful situation. Fat is good, but there can also be too much fat. Forgive the way I'm cutting on some of this. Sometimes using good knife skills and getting the right camera angle are in conflict with each other. All right, that is flat, beautiful right there. We have now the right amount of fat on our meat. Guys, mixing a dry rub is about as easy as it gets. Just get all of your ingredients into a single bowl. Watch out for that cayenne. That stuff is hot. If you get it on your skin and you rub your face later, it's going to burn, okay? Our salt in there, our onion powder, and our garlic powder. If you're wondering how you tell them apart, one is just slightly darker than the other, and of course you can just smell them. Well, once I get all of those together, I simply do a stir combined with my trusty whisk. You can just shake it together if you want, but I find this works well. And there we have it, guys. I have my dry rub ready to go on the meat, and I didn't have to pay an exorbitant price to get it. Now guys, when it comes to your dry rub, don't be bashful about it. Just get it all over the meat. Rub it all over the exterior surface of that meat. You can put it in your hand or just sprinkle it right on there. What gets on that board can be picked up and used. All right, now I'm going to do both sides. I'm going to do the fat side also, because that flavor is going to penetrate the same way that smoke penetrates. The flavor of this is going to get down in there also. Oh yeah, isn't that beautiful? Makes me just want to almost go to eating right now, and this thing hasn't even been cooked yet. We are ready to wrap this up. Now I'm just going to wrap this up in a dish. Basically, I'm just going to put it in a large dish and cover it with some saran wrap and let it set overnight, okay? Give this plenty of time, guys. No rush. Now guys, we have smoke. It is time to get our meat out here. This baby's had all night marinating, and now it's time for this baby to go out here. Now if you'll notice what I'm doing, I'm putting that fat side up. I'm putting the larger end towards the fire early, okay, because there's a lot more meat to cook in that location than there is over here. It's going to be a little warmer on this side than it is here because that's where the smoke and the heat are coming up from. All right, so when you're doing this, start it that way, and then after a few hours you can flip it, and that way if you like those burnt ends and things like that, you're going to get that evenly across there. Now we're just going to close this up. Remember, keep your temperature between 220, 225, and you're going to be making perfect barbecue. All right guys, it's time for us to make a mop. Now what I have here is a couple of cups of beef broth, a half a cup of white vinegar. You can use any vinegar you want for this. Some olive oil. I have 1 cup here. We're going to be using 2 cups of black pepper and about a teaspoon of salt. And what we're going to do is we're going to make what's called a mop. Do not confuse this for barbecue sauce. This is not barbecue sauce. This is a liquid that's put together by people that do barbecue. And we put these things together and cook them up in order to put them on top of meat while it's smoking. And we do this in order to retain moisture in the meat. It works. I'm telling you now, I've done meat with it and without it, and compared them side by side from the same smoking, and truly mops do work. All right, now the idea of a mop is acid here cuts the rind that builds up on the outside of the meat as you're cooking and kind of breaks it loose, allowing the liquid, or beef broth, to penetrate into that meat. We have also some oil. Now the oil is beautiful in helping to protect the meat the same way a layer of fat would, to keep that moisture that you've put into the meat locked in. Okay, so basically we have a variety of things happening here, but the important part of this, the most important part, is the oil, in my opinion, because that really coats that meat and it gives it a protection against fluid loss, but at the same time allows smoke to penetrate. I have a couple of tablespoons of black pepper, and I'll be using 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of salt. All right, all we have to do is put everything into our pot, bring it to a boil it for about 8 to 10 minutes at the most, and then we're ready to use our mop on our meat. It'll come to a vigorous boil, and when it does, we just let some of that vinegar cook down a little bit, and we end up with a fabulous product, which is a very good enhancement to your brisket. Guys, here's what it looks like when it's boiling. All right, so this gives off a bit of a sharp acidic smell, that vinegary smell. Don't worry about that. It's not too intense, especially when it's mixed down with that much beef broth. But it does leave its acid behind, and that's really the advantage here. So as I mentioned, it takes about 8 to 10 minutes on this. Give it a little bit of time. At the end of that, you're ready to take your mop, which is that little guy right there, and we're going to dip it down in that sauce, and we're going to get busy doing our mop. Guys, we have a good temperature here. It's 220 degrees. That's spot on perfect. And we have a beautiful looking piece of meat. This has been out here now, for about 2 hours. So it has a good start, all right? It's time though to do the mop. Now remember, I've got the fat side up on this, so I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to apply our mop to that meat side first. Now guys, this exposed meat side, that's the important part of the mop right there. The fat side kind of takes care of itself, and you can add the mop for flavor, which I'll do, but it isn't necessary to keep in moisture. But this side It is valuable. See how quickly that mop will spread that? That's the reason we use this. Okay. Now flip it back over again. Mop the other side. And don't worry about that spice we put on there. It's going to be just fine. And this will add to it and make it even better. So again, we check our fire occasionally, and if you need to know how to take care of running your smoker, I have a episode out. It's just prior to these, so check that out. It's all about how to run a smoker, and it'll teach you the nuances and how to set it up just right so that this won't be a problem and you get everything done perfectly. Throughout the day, we of course have to tend our fire. Make sure that it's good and hot. I will occasionally add charcoal to this or wood around the sides as needed. You know, let's get a good kind of a close-up in there so you can see how we've got that lined out. You can see on the right side, that's where the smoke goes up in the smoke chamber. And I put the wood all the way around the sides. This technique really works well, guys. The wood that I use, all of it has been soaked off in water. And I just add it up in here as needed to keep a good roll and a good flow. There you go. So I continuously add fuel to keep it smoking well. It's about once an hour. Now folks, there's something I wanted to talk to you about when it comes to wood, okay? This stuff right here. This is what I'm actually smoking with right here. This is oh wow, that smells so good. This is mesquite, okay? You notice mesquite's a little darker. If you rub a piece of wood that's oak and it's raw, and I don't recommend rub it hard because, you know, you'll get splinters, but rub it gently and just a slight amount, you know, just a gentle rub like I'm doing here, okay? You can then feel your fingers, and your fingers are going to be just like they were before. They'll feel dry, or they're going to feel slightly oily. Now that's what this wood does. Okay, this is a fairly fresh split piece of mesquite, and when I rub it, I can feel that oil on my fingers. I can feel it in the wood, and the wood is heavier also than things like oak or other hardwoods that are used for smoking. Mesquite has a very, very high ratio of oil in the wood itself. It's one of the reasons that it does so well in an arid area. Woods that come from really dry or extremely hot areas are woods that will often, hardwoods, that will be rich in these oils. For instance, lignum vitae, or what's called ironwood, comes from Mexico. It's very hot, and it's extremely oily wood. They call it ironwood. It's used for ship bearings. It's so oily, and it's very difficult to cut because of its oil. Ebony is another wood that's the exact same way, very hard to cut, exceptionally oily. And so some woods are just really oily, and they're generally, like I said, from very arid regions. Ebony's from Africa originally. Very hot regions that it grows in. And mesquite's no different. Mesquite grows all over Texas. It's a very Texas wood, but it's oily. Now, how does that pertain to making barbecue? Well, guys, generally, if you're going to do long smoking, you know, and what I'm talking about is like more than 8 hours, when you start getting up into 12, 14, 16 hours of smoke cooking, then you're looking at a situation where you need a very dry wood. Oak is a good example. Oak doesn't have a lot of oil in it. It's a very dry wood to work with when you're working with it as a carpenter. So that kind of wood is very good for long cooking. It doesn't have as much of those oils that produce, you know, some of the chemicals that affect the meat in different ways, as does something like mesquite. Now, if I take mesquite and try to cook for 12 hours with it, because of the intense amount of, well, let's say, just the much more rich smoke that's produced from it, it could make my meat come out bitter. okay, or way too smoky in its flavor. And if that happens, then, you know, if you can't taste the meat past the smoke, it's just not good. So we're looking for a balance, and I find that 8 hours is pretty much my cutoff time if I'm smoking gently with mesquite, and that's what I did today. It was a long smoke with mesquite. Now we're going to pull that off of the fire, put it in a pan, put it in the oven with a little water in it, and give it several hours. And the thing of it is that just allows the cooking to finish. The smoking's already done. The making the barbecue part is finished. Now we just have to finish breaking down the collagen, you know, those connective tissues in the meat, and turn this into the delicious, delightful item it can be. It has to be falling apart. It has to be hard to cut, even with a sharp knife. So let's get on with that. Okay guys, so here we have our brisket in off of the smoker. Now what we got to do here is get this ready to go down into our oven. Now this is important, remember those tannins, so we got to keep this cooked in the right way. Now what I'm going to do is, I've got a little bit of my mop left over. I'm just going to pour it over the top, and once I get that on there, we're going to add some water to this. I'm going to go ahead, get it, put some foil on top of it, and then we're going to get it down in the oven. So that's all there is to it, guys. So if you've got any of your mop left over, hey, you know, let's not waste it. Let's just put it right there on that brisket. That way we get all of its benefits. And then with that extra water, pour it right down in the pan. All you're going to need is about a cup to a cup and a half. After that, let's get foil on top of this. Now let's take that foil, let's tuck it on the edges real nice and clean and fold it under before we get this down in the oven, because we need the foil to help hold in steam. It's really a cool way of doing this. Now guys, you want your oven to be only 250 degrees, no more. Exactly 250, and that's it. Okay, this is going to take several hours to finish off, but the magic that happens in that oven is going to be unbelievable. Now you can, like I said before, you can do this out on that grill, and that's all right. You just have to keep the temperature low out there, keep it wrapped up so that no heat or no smoke can get to it as it finishes its cook. Okay, let's get this right on down here in our oven. There we go, and it's all done, guys. There we go. Well guys, as promised earlier in this video, the recipe for the dry rub, you've been seeing a lot on this show, so here's your actual proportions. On our recipe for this dry rub, I used 3 tablespoons of the paprika, 1 tablespoon of the cayenne, 1 tablespoon of cumin, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 2 teaspoons garlic powder, and 1 tablespoon of salt. All right, and we mix all of that together real well. Take it and rub it evenly across the entire surface of that meat, and you've got a wonderful dry rub. But you remember, you can't just throw it on there and cook. You have to give it time to do its magic. It has to sit in the fridge for a while. So once you've dry rubbed it, cover it, refrigerate it, and I would say at least a half a day or a full day, and then get it out on your smoke. Remember, trim your meat before you do your dry rub. Guys, the brisket is out of the oven and the pan has had long enough to cool so I can touch it. In other words, about 20-25 minutes. And it's time to get this thing sliced. So what I want to do is I'm going to remove it from this pan, put it down on the cutting board, and I'm going to show you how to slice out a brisket the right way, okay? Because you remember, you got 2 different muscles here, and they've got to be sliced different one from the other. So let me show you how to do that. There we go. We've transferred our meat. Now, let me tell you something. The grain on this meat runs this way, the direction that this is angled. So if I cut from this point this way, I get cuts directly across the grain. They will come out very tender and beautiful. That is the right way to do it. All right, guys, and as I mentioned, we got 2 cuts here. But if I go ahead and start making my first cuts up to about here, then we will see that other piece of meat, the second muscle. And at that point, that's when we're going to separate those two pieces. It's easier to do it this way. Now, before we get started on all of this, we want to remove what we call the burnt ends, okay? So that's this little goodie right back here. I'm going to put him over here. I want to remove that tip. By the way, the parts that I'm taking off right now are what some barbecue places will charge a great deal of extra money for. The flavor, oh, yeah. So those burnt tips, and you got another one right over here. These are all worth extra money in a barbecue place, all right? You're going to pay more for that right there. Now, you're sliced flat. See how that's starting to kind of just shred on me. Starting to get into that second muscle. I'm seeing a good band of fat under there. Now, first off, guys, look at the red banding on this. That is absolute, true, classic, perfect barbecue. Good barbecue has the red rind. See that? That beautiful band? That tells you it's the real deal, guys. Now, we're getting into that deeper fat cap here pretty soon. I'm going to be cutting into that second muscle. What I want to do is to transfer my meat back into that beautiful au jus that I had in my other pan. Now, let's get this transferred over from here to my other location, my pan. Looky here, guys, you're starting to see a little different appearance in that lower band of fat, and we're seeing that second cut of meat right there. Okay, this is the point where I separate my two cuts, and you can see them, they move one on top of the other here. You see that? Now, let me go ahead and move these pieces, and those will be my last of those first cuts off of the flat. Now I'm going to make more cuts off of the flat, but they won't have all of the rest of that underneath it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to separate that by taking my knife right up through there, guys, just like that. Isn't that beautiful? Watch how that comes off. There we go. This piece, which is that lower muscle, guys, let me tell you something. We're looking at a different grain set here. So what I need to do is turn this over. As you can see, we're running with the grain here. So what I need to do is to cut this way, all right? Now, some of my cuts are going to be long, so what I want to do, I want to split this in half, and I can make my cuts this way. Before I do that, though, I'm going to finish up my flat and get that up in my pan. And this, by the way, proper way to divide that brisket down and get it sliced up. That meat is just wanting to come apart. My knife is absolutely razor sharp, guys, but it's having a hard time with some of this because it's just so delicate, it's falling apart. Okay, guys, now our other pieces. Remember, we were going to be cutting cross grain on those also. So here we go. Now this head meat, much more delicate, much more tender because it had so much more fat in it, and it makes the best chopped barbecue. So if you like that chopped barbecue, that is the stuff to get right there. And there it is, guys. Isn't that beautiful? That is barbecue brisket at its finest. Gorgeous red band, beautiful tender beef, absolutely delicious, and I guarantee you, everybody you serve this to will be more than impressed. Guys, it's been a long day of smoking and making barbecue. Ooh, but boy, the rewards. Let me go and pull out a little of this right down here. I'm going to break a piece in half. Doesn't take much. It's very tender. It's just falling apart. Now, this, if you'll look, we've got that beautiful red band at the top there. That's the sign of real barbecue. Tender, falling apart tender. Smoky, beefy. A hint of our spices just trailing in the background. And it's delicious. Pardon me, guys. This is too good not to enjoy. It's fabulous. And when you learn how to make barbecue like this, there's no turning back. You're going to learn the importance of slow cooking, the importance of smoke, the importance of low temperature, and what it does to food. It's incredible. This is real Texas barbecue in real form. Guys, thank you very much for watching this show, for watching this episode. If you would, do me one big favor here, well, actually a few. Just please subscribe if you haven't done so. Please click the like button and share my videos. Also, please visit my channel. And if you haven't done so, drop me a message down below. It can be a request, it can be a statement. If you would like, questions, comments, they're all welcome, and I do appreciate you doing that. And guys, do one last thing. Just have a good day, okay? Bye-bye. Well, there it is, guys. Texas Cooking Today tutorial. Thank you very much for watching this show and for watching Texas Cooking Today. If you would, please go to my channel. Check out what I have there. There's some wonderful recipes and some great tutorials waiting for you to try. Again, thank you very much.